I'd like to welcome Randy Mercer from Mullen Trucking and Alderside. He's the safety director there, and he's going to be talking to us today about defensive driving.
Thank you, Richard, and welcome everyone this afternoon. I have two key points that I'd like to touch on today. We all drive, not professionally maybe, but certainly for pleasure, or some of us in this room may do both. There are two key downfalls that I wouldn't say everyone has, but the vast majority of people do and could improve on. A, following distance should be increased, and B, to slow down and reduce speed. So I'd like to touch on those two topics this afternoon. First of all, when an event happens in front of us down the road, we have to do a couple of things. The first thing we have to do is see and perceive. We have to see the event with our eye and perceive or understand what has happened ahead of us. After we've seen, perceived, and processed that information, we then have to react. So your next move would be to move your right foot from the accelerator to the brake pedal. Okay? Those two things take a period of time. See and perceive, the average person takes about 3/4 of a second to process information, and to react, likewise another 3/4 of a second. We're at 1.5 seconds here, even before the brake shoe or a pad touches the rotor or the drum. In the commercial side, we have air brakes, which you can add another 1/2 second for brake lag, or the time the air takes to travel through the system until the shoes contact the drum. So now we're up to 2 seconds. If you'd like a perspective of how much distance we cover, for an example, if you're traveling at 60 miles an hour down the road, if you take that number and divide by 2, and add these two numbers together, this is how many feet we travel down the highway per second. So we've just went down the road 180 feet in a matter of 2 seconds. Okay, even before you begin to slow down. Then we get into following distance. If it's too short, you have a certain increased possibility of rear-ending the person in front of you without a great following distance. Okay? This is not what stops our vehicle, however. The final factor that will determine if you stop would be, let me draw it here, maybe give you a little bit of a better idea. We have a tire and a road surface. Okay? If you are traveling down the road, in this case the example I used was 60 miles an hour, in relationship to the pavement we travel across, does your tire on your car or truck do the same speed all the way around? And the answer would be it is not. Now, I'm probably going to say something that you think I'm off my rocker. However, the top of the tire on your car goes at its fastest speed, in this case 60. The sides go half, and when it contacts the ground, it goes at 0 miles per hour. Okay? Traction is keeping this number at 0 and the tire at 0. As long as these two numbers stay at 0, you maintain traction. Now this happens in your car so quickly that you can't see it with your eye unless you put a slow motion video on it. However, I'll give you a few examples of what you can see with your eye. You can see a track on a dozer, a D10. It has plates. A plate goes on a spot on the ground. It doesn't move, but the top of the track is moving forward. Or if you're walking, your foot goes on the ground, your other foot will go half speed, full speed, half speed, and stop again. That's traction. Okay? When you change these numbers, we've lost traction. So if you brake too hard and the road does 60 underneath the tire. Okay? What I'm asking you to do today is reduce your speed and increase your following distance. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. That was very informative, and I will reduce my speed, I promise.
Personal computers are more and more part of our life every day. I have a senior network advisor to explain how internet works. I'd like to welcome and introduce Jesse Clark.
Thank you, Darren. Humankind has been defined by ages. There's been the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Age. And right now we're in something called the Information Age. And the vehicle that is driving the Information Age is called the Internet. That's what I'm going to talk about today. The 3 key points that I'd like to talk about are the history of the internet, where it came from, how it works, just a very high-level overview of how things work in that world, and kind of an idea of who controls it. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go. So as far as when the internet started, effectively, the U.S. government military was looking for a way. They had these new things called computers in the 70s. And they were trying to figure out a way to have them communicate along the eastern shore of the United States. They invented something called ARPANET, which would later evolve into something that we are familiar with called the Internet. That was in the 70s. In the 80s, universities started adopting this same type of communication technique. In the 90s, it started to gain popularity in the private sector, and obviously in the last 10 years, things have really blown up. It's more or less the primary means of communication for business and personal use. I want to try and illustrate at this time my second point as far as how it works. Let's take an example of a small example of how 3 different internet providers in a municipal area, say they're TELUS, Shaw, and because we have people from Saskatchewan, we'll use SaskTel. So these different providers have their own networks, and in a typical town, you would have different customers, right? So say one of these is you, one of them is your place of business, and one of them is, we'll use Facebook for an example. This is the location that the Facebook servers are on. The issue is, not every customer or internet user uses the same provider. And what you have here are different independent networks based on the provider that they're using. So essentially, you've got a problem, and how do you get customer A to talk to customer B? How do you access your website? And the way that works is that these 3 providers work together, and they share a common medium to share this information between them. This is the link that connects essentially the world together. Now this is on a small scale, so I want you to think about what this would look like wrapped around the planet. It's essentially the same idea, it's just bigger, and it covers every square inch almost of our world. That leads me to our next point. Now these are private companies, so you got to be thinking how are they going to work together? How do 3 different companies and on a world scale, how do they all make sure that there's no issues, there's no conflicts and the issues around that part of it? And that leads me to who controls the internet. It's not some guy sitting in a chair, Mr. Internet, controlling everything. It's really a consortium and a cooperation of individuals that make this work. And if you think about it, it's kind of a remarkable thing. You've got something that effectively it controls or is enveloping the whole planet and is effectively being guided and run by a series of individuals. It's not private business, but it's the private business that enacts it and allows it to happen. So in closing, it is amazing what humans can accomplish based on the fact that we can work together and we can make a system that will effectively enable the collaboration of every person on this planet. I believe this will carry us to the next age. Right now we're in the information age. I believe we'll be carried in the next 10 years to the next big thing. And we'll wait and see what that is. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse, for sharing your knowledge on this with us. As far as I'm concerned, I've always thought you just plug it into the wall and there it goes, but I can see there's a lot more into it than just that. So thank you.